The retirement cake sat half-eaten, its buttercream roses drooping under the weight of the evening's humidity. My daughter, Amelia, raised her glass, the crystal catching the last of the sun's orange glow. "A toast," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud, to Mom, and to a new, simpler chapter. Everyone murmured their agreement, the sound a gentle wave in my manicured backyard. Amelia's smile was perfect, a polished veneer she'd spent years perfecting. Then, without taking a breath, she added, "And to that end, I've decided I'm selling your car. You don't need it anymore." The wave of murmurs crashed into a sudden, sharp silence. All I did was smile. But what they saw as acceptance, what my daughter saw as surrender, was something else entirely. It was the calm that comes when you finally realize a storm you've been sensing for years has finally made landfall. How do you prepare for a war when the person declaring it is your own flesh and blood? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. The silence in the garden was profound. You could hear the ice shifting in people's glasses. My son-in-law, Mark, had a smear of red lipstick on his cheek from a congratulatory kiss, and his face was a mask of blank confusion. He looked at Amelia, then at me, as if waiting for someone to deliver the punchline to a joke he didn't understand. But Amelia's eyes, fixed on mine, held no humor. They were flat, resolute. The eyes of a businesswoman closing a deal she'd already decided was final. It was a look I was beginning to recognize, a cold flicker of her father that had, until now, remained dormant. The car she was referring to, my old sedan, was parked just beyond the patio, its dark blue paint gleaming under the porch light I'd just switched on. It wasn't a luxury vehicle, but it was mine. It was the last thing my husband Arthur bought for me before he passed. He'd polished the chrome himself, his big, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He said it was a dependable car for a dependable woman. He said it would see me through. And it had. It had taken me to grocery stores and doctor's appointments, to lonely trips to the cemetery, and to the hospital the day Amelia's first child was born. It was more than steel and rubber. It was the last tangible piece of my life with him. My smile, I know, must have looked strange. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the quiet internal click of a lock falling into place. For years, I had made excuses for Amelia's sharpness, her practicality, that often bled into cruelty. I'd told myself she was just stressed, just busy, just ambitious. Have you ever seen someone's true face for the first time, even after knowing them your whole life? In that moment, watching her stand there, so proud of her pragmatic solution to the problem of my retirement, I saw her not as my child, but as a stranger wearing her face. A stranger who saw my freedom as a liability to be managed. The car wasn't about transportation. It was about independence. It was the quiet promise that I could leave whenever I wanted, that I wasn't trapped. Selling it was her way of closing the gate, of turning my home into a comfortable cage. My gaze drifted past her to the car. I thought of Leo, the young mechanic down at the corner garage who kept it running. A good kid, with hands permanently stained with grease and eyes that were always tired. He was saving up to start his own shop, working 16-hour days while his wife cared for their new baby in a tiny apartment above the laundromat. He'd once told me how he admired the car's simple, reliable engine. "They don't make them like this anymore, Mrs. Miller," he'd said, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "This car has integrity." Integrity. That was the word. Arthur had it, Leo had it, my car had it, and as I looked back at my daughter, I realized with a chilling certainty that she did not. The party dissolved quickly after that. People made their excuses, their hugs a little too tight, their whispers of congratulations sounding more like condolences. Amelia and Mark stayed to help clear the plates, their movements efficient and detached. I went inside, the forced cheerfulness of the evening leaving a bitter taste in my mouth, like tonic water gone flat. I sat in my armchair, the one Arthur used to favor, and watched through the window as the last of the guests pulled away. Later that night, long after Mark had gone to bed, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. Amelia stepped inside, not in her party dress, but in silk pajamas, a folder clutched in her hand. Her face was serene, as if the earlier tension had never happened. "Mom," she said softly, her voice now gentle, persuasive. "I didn't mean for that to come out so bluntly earlier. It's just, we need to be practical." She sat on the edge of my bed, placing the folder beside her. "I've already found a buyer online. A great offer, really. It will all be taken care of by the end of the week. I'll handle all the paperwork." She patted my hand, her skin smooth and cool against my own. "It's for the best. You'll see." She looked at me, expecting gratitude, expecting me to agree with her cold, clean logic. But her eyes gave her away. This wasn't a sudden idea. This was a plan, and the folder in her hand was the proof. It wasn't about my needs, it was about her control. My own daughter was liquidating my life, piece by piece, and she'd brought the receipts. When Amelia closed the door behind her, the click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of my own home. A sound of finality, of a cage door being gently but firmly locked. For a long time, I didn't move. I just listened. I listened to the house settle around me, the old wood groaning like a ship at sea. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, a constant, monotonous drone that had always been a sound of comfort, but now felt like a warning. My husband, Arthur, had been a man who understood sounds. He'd taught me to listen to the car's engine, to know by the pitch and rhythm if something was wrong. "Everything talks, Nat," he used to say, his head under the hood, his voice muffled. "You just have to be quiet enough to hear what it's saying." For years, I had been listening to the wrong things, to Amelia's excuses, to her carefully constructed reasons, to the surface noise of our lives. I hadn't been quiet enough to hear what was underneath. The quiet dread that settled over me was cold and heavy, a physical weight in my chest. I looked at the folder she had left on the pristine white of my duvet. It was beige, unremarkable, the kind of folder you'd use for tax documents or insurance policies. But it felt like a bomb. Inside was the organized, itemized dismantling of my autonomy. I imagined the paperwork, the neat lines for signatures, the clinical language that would transfer the last piece of my husband, the last symbol of my freedom, into the hands of a stranger for a price Amelia deemed practical. When someone shows you their true colors, do you argue, or do you simply start mixing your own? I rose from the bed, my joints protesting, and the floorboards creaked under my feet, announcing my every move in the quiet house. I walked not to the folder, but to the small, silver-framed photograph on my dresser. It was Arthur and me, 20 years younger, leaning against that very car the day he brought it home. His arm was around my waist, and we were both laughing, squinting in the bright sun. His love had been a fortress. I had been so safe inside it that I never learned how to fight. Perhaps it was time. I made my way downstairs, each step a deliberate, silent rebellion. The keys were in the ceramic bowl by the door, exactly where they always were. I picked up the spare, its metal cool and solid in my palm. In my office, a room that smelled of old books and Arthur's pipe tobacco, I opened the small fireproof box where we kept the important documents. My hand was steady as I located the car's title. My name printed in clear block letters. Natalie Miller. Owner. It was still mine to give. The decision had already been made. In that moment, my daughter announced her intentions to the entire party, but this was the confirmation. This was the first quiet shot fired back. I took the cordless phone from its cradle, the plastic smooth against my cheek, and walked into the living room, sitting in the dark by the large window that overlooked the street. My old sedan was parked at the curb, a faithful shadow under the moonlight. I dialed the number for the garage from memory, my thumb pressing the buttons with a strange sense of calm. The sound of the phone ringing on the other end felt like a drumbeat, counting down to a future I was now creating for myself. It rang 4 times before a sleepy, gravelly voice answered. Hello? It was Leo. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Leo, it's Natalie Miller. I am so sorry to be calling you this late. There was a shuffling sound, the rustle of bedsheets. Mrs. Miller, is everything okay? Is it the car? The car is fine, Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper, afraid that Amelia might hear, that the very walls might be listening. In fact, it's perfect. It's so perfect that I want you to have it. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I heard a faint feminine murmur in the background, his wife likely asking who was calling. I don't understand, he finally stammered. It's a gift, Leo. For you and your family. For all your hard work. For your integrity. I explained that there was only one condition. He had to come and get it now. Before sunrise. Before anyone else in the house was awake. I left the spare key and the signed title under the driver's side floor mat and told him where to find them. He was still sputtering, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, when I hung up. I stood by the window for what felt like an hour, my heart a frantic bird in my ribs, until I saw a figure walking quickly down the empty street. It was Leo. He approached the car almost reverently, opened the door, and a moment later, the engine turned over with its familiar, gentle rumble. The headlights cut through the darkness, and then, the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. It was gone. A wave of both terror and triumph washed over me. I had done it. I went back to my room, the house still silent, still sleeping. But before I got into bed, a thought struck me. My favorite pair of gardening gloves, a gift from Arthur, were in the glove compartment. On pure instinct, I grabbed my own key, slipped out the front door, and walked to the empty space where my car once stood, the air still smelling faintly of its exhaust. Of course it wasn't there. The space was just a dark patch of pavement. A sudden, foolish panic seized me. I felt a tear, the first of the night, trace a hot path down my cheek. Then I remembered. There was a second glove compartment, a hidden one Arthur had built into the passenger side dash for hiding valuables on long trips. He had shown it to me once, years ago. I hurried back inside and down to the garage, to the old wooden chest where Arthur kept his tools and car manuals. I found the owner's manual for the sedan, its pages soft with age. As I flipped through it, a thick, sealed manila envelope fell out from between the pages on wiring diagrams. My name was written on the front in Arthur's familiar, strong handwriting. It wasn't a letter. It was heavy, rigid. My fingers trembled as I tore open the seal. Inside, wrapped in a simple cloth, was not a savings bond or a key. It was a second title. A title to a small, secluded cabin in the mountains, fully paid for, filed under my name and my name alone, dated just 6 months before he passed away. Tucked behind it was a bank book for an account I never knew existed, with a balance that made my breath catch in my throat. The paper in my hands felt both ancient and brand new, the thick cardstock of the title cool against my trembling fingers. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal, the raised edges a testament to its reality. A cabin, a bank account. It wasn't just a safety net, it was a secret life, a whole world Arthur had built for me without my knowledge. The initial shock felt like plunging into icy water, stealing my breath. But as the cold receded, a slow, burning warmth spread through my veins. It was the heat of a terrible, heartbreaking revelation. He knew. My husband, who had loved and protected me for 47 years, had spent his final months preparing for a threat he knew would come not from the outside world, but from within our own family. The dust from the garage floor had settled on the envelope, and the musty, stale taste of the air clung to the back of my throat. I carried my discovery into the kitchen as if I were holding a sacred artifact. The linoleum was cold against the soles of my bare feet, the sensation grounding me in the pre-dawn quiet. I set the documents on the kitchen table and began to make coffee, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in a world that had just tilted on its axis. the scrape of the scoop against the beans, the gurgle of the machine, the bitter, dark aroma filling the air. It was all so normal, so routine, a stark contrast to the earthquake that had just fractured the foundations of my life. He hadn't told me because he didn't want me to live in fear. He didn't want my last years with him to be tainted by suspicion toward our own daughter. He had simply, quietly, built me an ark. Now the flood was here, and I finally had a place to go. I drank the hot coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue, and stared at Arthur's handwriting. My grief for him was a living thing, but now it was intertwined with a profound, aching gratitude. With deliberate movements, I slipped the bankbook and the title back into the envelope and walked into my office. I hid it at the bottom of a box filled with old tax returns, a place so mundane and boring Amelia would never think to look. Then, I went back to the kitchen, washed my cup, and sat at the table, waiting for the sun to rise. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the floorboards creak overhead, then the sound of water running in the upstairs bathroom. A few minutes later, Amelia came down, dressed in sleek black leggings and a bright pink athletic top, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was a vision of discipline and control. She grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator without looking at me. "Morning," she said, her tone clipped, already focused on the miles she was about to run. "Good morning, dear," I replied, my voice even. She stretched one leg against the doorframe, then glanced out the front window, her gaze sweeping over the lawn. She paused. Her body went still. For a full 10 seconds, she didn't move, her back rigid. Then, she slowly turned her head and looked at me. Her face, which moments before had been a mask of placid health, was now twisted with disbelief. "Where?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "Is the car?" I summoned every acting lesson I'd never had. I blinked, feigning a gentle, sleepy confusion. "The car? Oh, it must be out front, dear, where it always is." "No," she said, walking to the window and peering out, as if a different angle might make it reappear. "It's not. The space is empty. Where is it?" I put a slight tremor in my hand as I brought it to my cheek. "Oh my, are you sure? Maybe you just can't see it from that angle." "Mom!" Her voice was sharp now, cracking like a whip in the quiet kitchen. "Stop it. I'm not playing games. What did you do?" I let my eyes well up with plausible tears, thinking of Arthur, thinking of this profound final betrayal she had forced upon him. I don't know what you mean," I whispered. "I had a strange dream. Someone was singing." I let my voice trail off, my eyes distant. "Did I go for a walk? I can't quite remember." Amelia stared at me, her jaw clenched. I could see the war in her mind. Was this real? Was this the first, terrifying sign of a complete mental collapse? Or was it the most infuriating act of defiance she had ever witnessed? Her need to control me was fighting against the future she had already planned, a future where my mind would inevitably fail. "Isn't it funny how the people who try to cage you are the most shocked when you learn how to fly?" "You did this on purpose," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You did this to spite me. After everything I'm doing for you, after I arranged everything to make your life easier." "Easier for whom, Amelia?" The question was out before I could stop it, my voice quiet but clear. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "That's it. I'm calling Mark. We're getting a lawyer. We'll get power of attorney. You've proven you are not capable of making decisions for yourself anymore." She pulled out her phone, her thumb jabbing at the screen. She was about to press the call button, her face a mask of righteous fury, a daughter pushed to the brink by her impossible senile mother. Just as she raised the phone to her ear, a loud, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. It wasn't the rap of a neighbor or the tap of a delivery person. It was a sharp, insistent sound, the kind of knock that could not be ignored. We both froze, my feigned confusion and her raw fury instantly suspended in the charged air. The knocking came again, harder this time, demanding an answer. The second knock was harder than the first, a solid, percussive sound that seemed to shake the very doorframe. It was the sound of purpose, of someone who would not be turned away. Amelia, her face still flushed with rage and her phone still clutched in her hand, seemed to interpret the sound as an affront to her authority. With a furious sigh, she stalked to the door and wrenched it open. The woman standing on my porch was the complete opposite of the chaos contained within my house. I saw her clearly over Amelia's shoulder. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, the kind of clothing that spoke of quiet confidence and serious money. Her eyes, magnified slightly by a pair of sophisticated glasses, were calm and intelligent. In one hand, she held a worn but expensive leather briefcase. It was her gaze that was most striking. It passed over my furious, athletic wear-clad daughter with polite disinterest and landed directly on me. "Natalie Miller?" she asked, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the thick tension in the hallway. Amelia immediately stepped in the way, blocking my view. "I'm her daughter, Amelia. You can speak with me." "My mother is—" She's had a very confusing morning. The implication was clear. "My mother is not well. I am in charge here." The woman's polite smile didn't waver, but she took a subtle step to the side, re-establishing her line of sight with me. She did not acknowledge Amelia's statement at all. "My name is Evelyn Reed, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice softening with empathy as she spoke to me. "I was your husband Arthur's attorney. He left very specific instructions for me to pay you a visit, 1 week, following your official date of retirement. I hope I'm not intruding." The world seemed to slow down. Arthur's attorney? We had an attorney, a friendly man named George, we'd used for years to draft our simple wills. This woman was a stranger. The sight of her, so crisp and professional, holding a briefcase that undoubtedly contained my husband's secrets, was both terrifying and electrifying. A long hidden piece of his life was standing on my doorstep. I found my voice, and when I spoke, the feigned fragility from moments before was gone. "You are not intruding at all, Ms. Reed. Please, come in." Amelia shot me a look of pure venom, her mouth opening to protest, but I was already walking past her, holding the door open for my guest. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was almost a physical force. I led Ms. Reed into the living room, the same room where my retirement party had soured just the night before. She sat gracefully on the sofa, placing her briefcase on her lap with a soft click of its latches. Amelia remained standing by the doorway, a thunderous storm cloud of a woman, radiating fury and suspicion. Have you ever had help arrive from a place you never expected, at the exact moment you needed it most? Ms. Reed seemed entirely unperturbed by my daughter's hostility. She opened her briefcase and retrieved a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with a blob of dark blue wax. My name was written across the front in Arthur's hand. Arthur was a very methodical man, Ms. Reed began, her eyes on me. He was also very private. He engaged my services 5 years ago to establish a separate trust, one designed to manage a portion of his assets independently of his primary estate. Amelia let out a short, sharp laugh. "A separate trust? What on earth for?" "My father and I managed their finances for the last decade. Everything was in order." Ms. Reed finally turned her gaze to my daughter. Her expression was perfectly neutral, which somehow made it all the more devastating. "He felt it was a necessary precaution to ensure your mother's absolute security and independence in her retirement." She then turned back to me and held out the thick envelope. "He wrote this for you. He asked that you read it when you are alone. However, my instructions were to inform you both of the trust's primary stipulation." Amelia crossed her arms, a smirk playing on her lips. "Let me guess. He made you the executor. A nice payday for you." "I am the executor, yes," Ms. Reed said calmly. "But the primary stipulation does not concern me. It concerns you, Amelia." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat. Arthur's instructions were explicit and legally binding. The assets within this trust, which, I should mention, are substantial and include several properties and a significant investment portfolio, are to be managed for your mother's sole benefit. You are to have no signing authority, no discretionary power, and no legal access to them whatsoever. The smirk vanished from Amelia's face. That's ridiculous. I'm her daughter. I'm an investment advisor. Why would he do that? Ms. Reed's gaze was unwavering, her professional mask firmly in place. But underneath, I saw a flicker of something else, a deep, abiding loyalty to her client, to my husband. Yes, she said, her voice now holding a new, sharper edge. He was aware of your professional record. He was particularly concerned after the Henderson account incident 3 years ago, the one from which you were quietly terminated for unauthorized high-risk trading. He knew you told your parents you'd left to start your own consultancy, and he chose not to confront you. Instead, he chose to protect your mother. I remembered the dinner 3 years ago with perfect clarity. We were at Amelia's favorite Italian restaurant, the one with the checkered tablecloths and overpriced wine. She'd raised her glass, her eyes bright with what I thought was ambition. To new beginnings, she'd announced. I'm leaving the firm. It's time I struck out on my own. Mark had beamed beside her, and Arthur and I had toasted our brilliant, fearless daughter. We were so proud. That memory, once a source of warmth, now curdled in my mind, the taste of it turning to ash in my mouth. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed performance to cover her failure, her disgrace. Ms. Reed's words hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen from the room. What is louder, a house full of shouting, or the silence that comes after a lie has been exposed? In that moment, the silence in my living room was deafening. The only sound was a strange, choked gasp from Amelia. It was the sound of a carefully built dam shattering, of a lifetime of secrets bursting forth in a single ruinous flood. The furious, righteous woman from moments ago vanished. In her place was a pale, trembling stranger. That's not true," she stammered, her eyes darting between Ms. Reed's implacable face and my own. "It was a corporate restructuring, a misunderstanding. The Henderson account was complex." The words tumbled out, weak and unconvincing, the desperate excuses of a child caught with a stolen cookie. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. For the first time in my life, she was looking to me not as a resource to be managed, but as her mother, hoping I would rush in, smooth things over, and protect her from the consequences of her own actions. The instinct was there, a deep, primal pull to comfort my child's pain, but it was overshadowed by a colder, clearer truth. The person who needed my comfort was my husband, and he was gone. He had carried this ugly secret alone, shielding me from the truth of what our daughter had become. My grief for him in that moment was a physical blow, so sharp and profound it almost buckled my knees. I saw him sitting up late in his office, worrying. I saw him making these secret arrangements, his heart heavy with the knowledge he couldn't share. He had been protecting me, not just from financial ruin, but from this very moment, the moment I saw my own child for what she truly was. Slowly, I rose to my feet. My movements felt steady, grounded. The frail, confused woman I had been pretending to be was gone, burned away by the terrible clarity of the truth. I looked at my daughter, her face streaked with tears I now knew were for herself, not for me. "I think," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute finality. "It's time for you to go home, Amelia." She stared at me, her mouth agape. She had been prepared for me to scream, to cry, to collapse. She was not prepared for me to dismiss her. "Mom, wait." "There's nothing left to say," I said, walking toward the hallway. I turned to the other woman in the room. "Ms. Reed, thank you for honoring my husband's wishes. I will need some time to process this. And to read his letter. I will call your office this afternoon." Evelyn Reed gave a small, respectful nod. She rose, snapped her briefcase shut, and handed me a business card. "Of course, Mrs. Miller. Take all the time you need. The trust is secure. I will await your call." I walked with her to the door. Amelia hadn't moved. She was frozen in the living room, a statue of her own ruin. As I opened the door, I paused and turned back, looking at my daughter one last time. Then, I walked to the small ceramic bowl by the entrance and picked up the spare key to my house. I walked back to Amelia and held it out to her. Her eyes widened in confusion. "You won't be needing this anymore," I said softly. Her hand didn't move, so I simply opened her palm and dropped the key into it. The sound of the metal hitting her skin was a small, dull thud. Then I walked back to the front door and held it open, waiting. Numbly, like someone in a trance, Amelia walked past me, out of the house, and into the bright morning light. I closed the door behind her, and the sound of the bolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. With Ms. Reed gone and Amelia banished, the house was utterly silent. I stood alone in the hallway, clutching the thick, wax-sealed envelope. It was the only thing that mattered now. I went back to the living room and sat down in Arthur's worn armchair, the leather sighing under my weight. My hands, I noticed, were shaking. I looked at his strong, familiar handwriting, and for a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt too final, but I knew I had to. With a deep breath, I broke the wax seal. The thick paper unfolded with a soft rustle. His words, his last words to me, were there on the page. "My dearest Nat," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the part of me that always feared for your peace has been proven right. I am sorry for the secrets, my love, but I could not bear to burden you with them while I was alive. The cabin is your fortress, a place for you to breathe. The money is your shield to ensure you answer to no one. But this letter is your sword. Amelia's greed is a sickness, and I fear what she is truly capable of. I have left you the means to protect yourself, but there is one last thing you must know. The truth is not in a bank or in a title. It's in the floorboards of the old garage, right under my workbench. She must never find it." The words on the page seemed to burn themselves into my mind. "The wolves are at your door. What she is truly capable of." I read the letter 3 times, and with each reading, the loving words of my husband became a chilling testament to a fear he had harbored in secret. This wasn't just about a car or control. This was about a fundamental darkness in our daughter that he had seen and I had missed. The betrayal wasn't just Amelia's anymore. It was my own ignorance. How could I have been so blind? My quiet, empty house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, the scene of a crime I was only just beginning to uncover. Arthur's warning, "She must never find it," created a frantic, ticking clock in my head. Amelia was gone, but she was also wounded, cornered. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. I couldn't call Ms. Reed, not yet. This was Arthur's last instruction to me, a task for me and me alone. I folded the letter, tucked it into my pocket where I could feel the stiff paper against my leg, and walked with a grim purpose to the garage. The air inside was cool and still, saturated with the familiar scents of motor oil, sawdust, and Arthur's patient labor. It had always been his sanctuary, and now it was my searching ground. I found his pry bar hanging on the wall, its forged steel heavy and cold in my hands. My own fingers, wrinkled and spotted with age, felt frail wrapped around the tool. I knelt by the hulking form of his old workbench, the place where he'd spent countless hours fixing what was broken. How well do you ever really know the people you love? What secrets do they keep? Not from you, but for you. The floorboards here were old, thick planks of oak, stained dark with oil and time. He had specified the area, right under the bench. I had to slide his heavy wooden toolbox, full of wrenches and sockets, out of the way first. The effort sent a sharp pain through my lower back, and the acrid taste of dust filled my mouth. I ran my fingers along the edges of the planks until I felt it. One board had the slightest give, a barely perceptible shift that no one would ever notice unless they were looking for it. I jammed the flat edge of the pry bar into the thin crack. Pushing down with all my weight, I put my entire body into the motion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a long, agonizing screech of nails being torn from wood that was a century old, The board gave way. It splintered at the edge, resisting, fighting me, before finally popping loose. I tossed the pry bar aside and lifted the heavy plank with my hands, my palms stinging from the rough, unfinished wood. Beneath it was a dark, square hollow, lined with cobwebs and smelling of damp earth. And nestled inside was a small black metal box. It was a simple fireproof safe box, the kind used for documents. It wasn't locked. A simple metal latch held it shut. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. With trembling fingers, I lifted the box out. It was heavier than it looked. I brushed the dirt and cobwebs from the lid and clicked the latch open. The contents were not what I expected. There was no cash, no jewelry. It was a file. A thin file filled with papers. On top was a sheaf of financial statements from the Henderson account, showing a series of unauthorized, catastrophic trades. Beneath that was a signed, notarized letter from a man named Robert Henderson, detailing a pattern of threats and blackmail from Amelia after he discovered her fraud. She hadn't just lost his money. She had tried to extort him to cover it up. He agreed to settle, to not press criminal charges, only if she was terminated immediately and a private restitution was paid. And at the bottom of the file, stapled to the settlement agreement, was a canceled check from a bank account I didn't recognize. It was for $250,000. The check was signed not by Amelia, but in my husband's familiar, steady hand. Arthur had paid for her silence. He had saved her from prison, and he had never told me. The sickness rose in my throat, a dizzying wave of nausea and grief. This was the sword he had left me. This was the truth. As I stared at the canceled check, the proof of my daughter's crime and my husband's silent sacrifice, a sound from the house cut through my horrified trance. It came from the connecting door that led from the garage into the kitchen. A faint, metallic scratching sound. Then, the distinct, sickening click of a key turning in the lock. The doorknob turned. I froze, crouched on the dusty floor, the open box in my lap. I had taken her key. I had dropped it into her palm myself. The door creaked open, and slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the kitchen linoleum. I was no longer alone in the house. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Crouched on the dusty concrete of the garage floor, I was a trapped animal, the evidence of my daughter's treachery held in my trembling hands. The footsteps were slow, measured, crossing the kitchen with an unnerving calm that was far more terrifying than rage would have been. I braced myself for the confrontation, for the sight of Amelia's face contorted with fury at having been outmaneuvered. The connecting door swung inward, casting a long rectangle of pale kitchen light across the grimy floor. But the figure silhouetted in the doorway was not my daughter. It was a man, and as my eyes adjusted, my breath caught in a strangled gasp of disbelief. It was Leo, the young mechanic. He wasn't wearing his grease-stained overalls. He was dressed in clean jeans and a simple dark jacket, and his face, usually so open and friendly, was etched with a deep, anxious concern. His gaze fell on me, then to the pried-up floorboard, and finally to the open metal box in my lap. A wave of profound relief washed over his features. So powerful it was, as if he'd been holding his breath for days. "Thank God!" he whispered, the sound startlingly loud in the silence. He took a step into the garage, holding up a single shining key. "He said you'd know where to look. He said the car was the signal." My mind struggled to connect the pieces. The key in his hand wasn't a car key, it was a house key, a key to my house, a key I had never given him. I could only stare, the file from the box clutched to my chest. The secret of Amelia's crime felt profoundly dangerous, a lit bomb I had just unearthed. "Arthur!" I finally managed to say, my voice a dry, cracking whisper. "Yes, ma'am," Leo said, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective loyalty that I recognized instantly. It was the same look Arthur used to give me. He asked me to look out for you, years ago. He knew this day might come. He gave me this key and told me to keep it safe. He made me promise that if you ever gave me the car, It meant the plan was in motion. It meant you were in trouble and that I was to come here immediately. Not to interfere, he said, but to help. The sheer, staggering depth of my husband's foresight left me breathless. He hadn't just left me a fortress and a sword. He had left me a guardian, a loyal soldier to stand with me. Sometimes the ghosts that protect us are not ghosts at all, but plans set in motion by a love that refuses to die. Have you ever felt a presence like that? Tears I hadn't realized I'd been holding back began to stream down my face, hot trails through the grime on my cheeks. They weren't tears of fear anymore, but of a grief so profound and a love so overwhelming, it felt like my heart would break. Leo looked down at the box in my hands. He called that the insurance policy, he said quietly. He told me that what was in that box would end it, whatever it was. He trusted you to know what to do with it. We were a strange pair in the dim light of the garage, a grieving widow and a young mechanic, bound together by the incredible, meticulous love of a dead man. The garage suddenly felt too exposed, the open door a vulnerability I couldn't bear. "Help me up, Leo," I said, my voice gaining strength. He gently took the box from my hands, set it aside, and offered me his arm, pulling me to my feet. We went into the kitchen and sat at the table, the black metal box between us like a final damning piece of evidence in a long trial. The weight of what I had to do next felt immense. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my own family. I must have looked hesitant, my resolve wavering, because Leo's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice low and pained. "Arthur made me promise I would only tell you this last part if you hesitated. If you thought for 1 second that Amelia, deserved another chance." He took a deep breath. About 6 months before he passed, when the cancer was making him weak, she came to see him, alone. She tried to get his doctor to sign papers saying his mind was getting confused, that he was becoming incompetent. The blood drained from my face. She wanted control of everything, before he was even gone. The doctor was a good man. He refused, and he called Arthur the moment she left his office. That was the day Arthur came to see me with the key. That's when he finalized everything. He knew she wouldn't just wait for him to die. He knew she'd already tried to bury him while he was still breathing. That was it. That was the final betrayal. It was one thing to steal money, to lie, to crave control. It was another thing entirely to try and erase the mind and dignity of your own dying father. The last flicker of maternal softness in my heart for Amelia was extinguished, replaced by something cold, hard, and clear as ice. I looked at the box, then at Leo. My hand no longer trembled. "Get my coat, Leo," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "And bring the box. We're going to see my lawyer." The drive into the city was a blur of passing lights. Leo drove with a quiet focus, his hands steady on the wheel, while the black metal box sat on the seat between us like a silent, heavy passenger. I stared out the window, watching my reflection flicker across the dark glass. Arthur's greatest secret, I realized, wasn't the cabin or the money. It wasn't even the horrible truth about our daughter. His greatest secret was the sheer, formidable strength he had hidden behind his gentle, unassuming smile. He had been a warrior in quiet repose, preparing for a war he prayed would never come. Now, I was his appointed general, and my only duty was to see his final campaign through to victory. Ms. Reed's office was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel tower that pierced the night sky. The elevator ascended with a silent, stomach-lurching swiftness. When the doors opened, we stepped into a world of profound, expensive quiet. The only sounds were the whisper of the air conditioning and the distant, muted hum of the city far below. It was a place of power, a place where fortunes were decided and lives were altered with the stroke of a pen. Evelyn Reed was waiting for us, her office lights casting a warm glow in the surrounding darkness. She didn't look surprised to see us, or the box Leo carried. It was as if she had been expecting this very moment for 5 years. She led us to a conference room with a long, polished mahogany table. "I assumed you would not wait until morning," she said, her voice a calm anchor in my swirling emotions. I sat down, and Leo placed the box on the table with a soft, definitive thud. With steady hands, I opened it and pushed the file across the gleaming surface toward her. She didn't say a word as she read, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The only sound in the room was the crisp, dry rustle of paper as she turned each page, each document a new layer in the architecture of my daughter's deceit and my husband's pain. When she was finished, she closed the file and folded her hands on top of it. "The statute of limitations on the original fraud and extortion has likely passed," she said, her voice clinical and precise. "So, criminal charges are not a viable path. But that isn't the purpose of these documents. Their purpose is leverage. This file makes it impossible for Amelia, or anyone she might hire, to ever successfully argue that you are not of sound mind and body. This is the proof that Arthur's preparations were not the actions of a paranoid man, but of a prudent one. They say the best defense is a good offense. But what do you do when the person you're fighting is the one you were supposed to defend for her entire life?" "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Ms. Reed's expression sharpened. "Now we act. Amelia's ego is her greatest weakness. She has been dismissed and exposed. Her next move, I guarantee, will be to file an emergency petition for conservatorship over you and your estate. She will paint you as an unstable, grieving widow who is giving away assets. She will use the car as her proof. We cannot allow her to make the first move. We have until the court clerk's office opens at 9 a.m. to file our own petitions and block her before she even begins." She laid out the plan with the cool efficiency of a master strategist. It was a three-pronged attack. First, we would file for a temporary restraining order, citing Amelia's long-term deception and the potential for financial and emotional abuse. Second, a formal notice of the trust's existence and its explicit stipulations would be delivered by courier to her husband, Mark, ensuring he understood that his wife's perceived inheritance was a fantasy. Third, we would give Amelia a choice: sign a legally binding document relinquishing any and all future claims to the estate and walk away, or we would submit the contents of the black box as evidence in the court proceedings, an act that would undoubtedly trigger a professional review and end her career. It was a checkmate, designed by Arthur and executed by Ms. Reed. All it required was my command. "Do it," I said, the words tasting of iron and finality. A small, grim smile touched Ms. Reed's lips. "I'm glad to hear you say that," she said, "because Arthur anticipated this exact moment. He prepared one last thing in the event you chose to fight." She rose and walked to a large, secure filing cabinet against the wall, unlocking it with a key. She returned with a thick, sealed envelope, far more official-looking than the letter he had left for me. "Arthur called this a letter to a judge," she said, placing it on the table before me. "It is his sworn and notarized affidavit, written in his final month of life. It details his first-hand account of Amelia's attempt to have him declared incompetent. It outlines his fears for your safety and his precise, logical reasoning for every secret arrangement he made. If Amelia so much as hints at a legal battle, this is our opening salvo. It will not only guarantee a victory in court, it will be so damning it will almost certainly destroy her professional life for good." I stared at the envelope. It wasn't a shield or a sword. It was a cannon, aimed directly at the life my daughter had built upon a foundation of lies. All I had to do was give the order to fire. Leo drove me home through deserted streets, the city's restless energy having finally succumbed to the lateness of the hour. He walked me to the front door, the black box, and Arthur's final damning letter now in his safekeeping until morning. He promised to return at dawn, to be there when the first moves were made. When he left, I was truly alone for the first time since this nightmare began, and the silence of the house was an immense, crushing weight. I didn't even try to sleep. I sank into Arthur's armchair, the worn leather embracing me like a memory. On a small end table sat a silver-framed photograph of Amelia at age 7, grinning at the camera, with a gap where her front tooth should be. I remembered that day so clearly. We'd had a picnic in the park, and she'd been so proud of that lost tooth, convinced the tooth fairy would make her rich. My finger traced the outline of her small, happy face. How did that innocent child become the woman I was now preparing to destroy? The thought was a physical pain, a cold, sharp object pressing against my ribs. I spent the next hours in a silent, torturous debate, wrestling with the ghost of the mother I used to be. Every cell in my body screamed with the instinct to protect my child, yet every rational thought told me that the child I sought to protect no longer existed. Was there a point where a mother's love is no longer a duty? A point where self-preservation must finally come first? The air grew stale. I made a pot of coffee around 3 a.m., and the taste was bitter and dark on my tongue, doing little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I stood at the living room window, my forehead pressed against the cool, smooth glass, and stared out at the dark, sleeping street. It looked so peaceful, so normal, a perfect facade for the turmoil raging within me. The weight of the decision felt too heavy to bear alone. I needed to hear a voice that understood, a voice that was part of this new, strange reality. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone and dialed Leo's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice instantly alert and clear, as if he'd been sitting by the phone, waiting. "Mrs. Miller? Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry to call so late, Leo," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I have to ask you, are we doing the right thing?" There was no hesitation in his reply. His voice was simple, steady, an anchor in my storm of doubt. "We're doing what Arthur knew you'd have to do," he said gently. "He didn't set this all up to hurt Amelia. He did it to protect you. We're keeping you safe. That's all. We're keeping you safe." That was it. That was the core of it all. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. Arthur had known that in the end, it would come down to this: my peace or Amelia's impunity. He had made his choice, and now, finally, so did I. A strange calm washed over me as I hung up the phone. The internal battle was over. There was no more turmoil, only a quiet, sad certainty. I was the executor of my husband's last will, and I would not fail him. I sat back down in the armchair as the first, faint, gray light of dawn began to seep through the windows, chasing the deepest shadows from the corners of the room. Monday, October 13th, the day the war would begin. I felt a sense of profound, weary peace, the calm of a soldier in the silent moments before the first shot is fired. I closed my eyes, just for a second, listening to the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. And then, a sound from the back of the house shattered the morning stillness. It wasn't a knock or a key. It was a sudden, violent crash. The unmistakable, splintering explosion of shattering glass, followed by the crack of a wooden frame being forced. My eyes flew open, my heart instantly seized by a new kind of terror. The legal battle, the couriers, the petitions, all of it was too slow. Amelia wasn't waiting for the courts. She was here, and she was breaking in. The sound of the kitchen window shattering was the last piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The final violent act of a cornered child who had never learned that actions have consequences. Family betrayal wasn't a quiet, verbal dismissal anymore. It was the crunch of glass underfoot in my own home. For a single frozen moment, a primal fear gripped me. Then Arthur's planning, Leo's loyalty, and Evelyn Reed's strategy coalesced into a single, cold point of clarity in my mind. I did not scream. I did not hide. I moved. With a calmness that felt utterly alien, I picked up the telephone from the hall table and my husband's final, sworn affidavit from the armchair. I walked deliberately, not away from the sounds of my daughter in the kitchen, but toward them, stopping at the door of Arthur's old office. I stepped inside, closed the solid oak door behind me, and turned the heavy brass lock. Its click was a sound of finality. Through the thick wood, I could hear her moving through my house, her voice a ragged, desperate snarl. Mom, I know you're in here. We are going to talk about this. Her footsteps were heavy, frantic. A lamp crashed to the floor in the living room. I calmly dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline of professional calm in my sea of chaos. I kept my own voice to a low, even whisper. My name is Natalie Miller. My daughter has just broken into my home. She is violent and unstable. I am locked in my husband's study. I gave them the address as Amelia's footsteps pounded down the hall toward me. The doorknob rattled violently. Then the banging started, the blows of her fist shaking the very frame. Mother, open this door! She shrieked, her voice stripped of all its polished sophistication, leaving only raw, thwarted rage. You will not do this to me. You will not ruin my life. Knowing help was only moments away, I pressed my forehead against the cool, smooth wood of the door. The time for pretending, for hiding, was over. It's already ruined, Amelia, I said, my voice carrying through the door, not with anger, but with a profound, aching sadness. You ruined it yourself, a long time ago. Your father knew it. And now, so do I. The banging stopped. In the sudden silence, another sound began to filter in from the outside. A faint, distant siren, growing steadily louder, closer. I walked to the office window and looked out. The first rays of the rising sun were glinting off the windshield of a police car as it turned onto my street, its blue and red lights painting the neighbors' houses in silent, flashing strokes of alarm. Amelia heard it too. I heard a choked gasp from the other side of the door, a sound of pure animal panic. When the police finally broke down the front door, they found her in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of her own destruction, the shattered glass, the overturned furniture. She looked wild, desperate, and utterly defeated. I unlocked the office door and walked out to meet them, the affidavit in my hand. Leo arrived moments later, his face pale with worry. He carried the black box. It was all over. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. The restraining order was made permanent. With the evidence from the box and Arthur's letter to the judge, Amelia's legal challenges crumbled into nothing. Ms. Reed handled everything with brutal efficiency, dismantling Amelia's life with the very tools Arthur had provided. I didn't have to see my daughter again. My last memory of her was that of a stranger, a cornered animal in the ruins of the home she had violated. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in the quiet, empty house for the last time. I was leaving it all behind. As I closed the front door, a brand new, dark blue SUV pulled into the driveway. It was Leo. He got out, a small smile on his face. Ms. Reed handled the arrangements, he said. She said you'd need a way to get to the mountains. Arthur always said you were a dependable woman. He'd want you to have a dependable car. His words echoed my husband's from a lifetime ago, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, my smile was genuine. I got in the car, leaving the key to the house on the seat for the real estate agent, and we drove away, the past shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was gone. The moral of this story is not about revenge, but about liberation. True independence isn't found in what you own or who you control. It's found in the courage to protect your own peace, even if it means letting go of a person you thought you could never lose. Sometimes the most loving act a mother can perform is to finally stop saving her child from the person they've chosen to become. What did you think of Natalie's final decision? Let me know in the comments below. And please don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.